It is part of any national government's essential mandate to defend its country's borders. That is no longer purely a territorial matter. As technology has transformed the world, new threats such as economic and criminal cyber theft, hostile online political interference, and breaches of the digital substructure of modern life are now possible and require state-of-the-art defenses. Joining us now to understand what's needed to secure a country's digital sovereignty. In the nation's capital, Wesley Wark, visiting professor at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. And here in studio, Melissa Hathaway, President, Hathaway Global Strategies. Walter Bohmeyer, Senior Partner and Global Leader in Cybersecurity at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group. And Eldon Sprickerhoff, Founder and Chief Security Strategist at the cybersecurity firm eCentire. And we want to thank Cyber Canada Senior Leadership Summit, which has been taking place all week in the capital city, and you folks are all in for that, so we're grateful they could loan you to us long enough to have this conversation. Wesley, nice to have you joining us in the nation's capital as well, and I want to start with you because, of course, we just had a federal budget in this country earlier this week, huge increase in spending on cybersecurity, $500 million over 5 years. That's almost a seven-fold increase over a budget of just a couple of years ago. Start off by telling us, what does that tell us?
Well, the spending announcement, Steve, was tucked away in Chapter 4 of the budget. You have to hit page 203 before you get there. But it is a significant amount of money. The finance minister actually talked about a figure closer to $750 million over 5 years. But the main thing is, I think this is just the first tranche of money that's going to have to be spent on cybersecurity by the federal government. And what this indicates in terms of its presence in the budget, I think, is that the government is fundamentally rethinking its national security priorities. You know, for a long time, we have become used to the idea that terrorism was the #1 threat to national security. This was repeated endlessly. I think the spending announcement and the soon-to-be revealed cybersecurity strategy really represents a moment in time where the government is saying, really, our #1 national security threat is cyber aggression in all its forms, and we're going to have to start spending big and paying more attention to this with that recognition.
Well, it's interesting because there really was no increase to speak of in the sort of traditional military budget. And then, of course, as we've indicated, a huge increase in the cybersecurity budget. Do you infer from this that the government is therefore thinking more broadly as it relates to issues of national security?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that they're boosting cyber aggression threats and the need to respond to those threats to the top place in the national security priority list. There are lots of threats out there. Terrorism will remain one, but I think the thinking of the current government is that it is the cyber piece that is really the one that needs tackling most urgently, and where significant spending upgrades have to be made. The spending in the budget that's earmarked, I think, is just a beginning, to be honest. It's a lot of money, but it's just a beginning. It's going to the communication security establishment to take on some new functions around cybersecurity and really to centralize their role in terms of protecting federal government information infrastructure, but also reaching out to the private sector. It's also, some money is going to the RCMP, and some money will be going to the yet as unseen cybersecurity strategy and whatever may be revealed there. But I think there's going to be more initiatives in that strategy that might look very interesting.
Let's bring up a chart here which shows a kind of a snapshot of what motivates cyber attacks. This is just from the past year, and the big blue wedge of the pie on the left. Look at that. 3 out of every 4 are cyber crimes. That's criminals carrying out criminal activity against individuals or businesses. We then get much smaller, the red chunk of the pie on the right-hand side there. 14.5% is cyber espionage. That's state-affiliated groups looking to gain access to confidential information. The purple wedge, 4.7%, are hacktivists, those using hacking for political or social agenda. And finally, the last chunk of the pie, top right corner, 3.4%, cyber warfare, states penetrating other states to cause damage or disruption. Let me just finally, Wesley, one more question to you on this. Do you have some sense, I know you indicated what agencies are going to get what, but do you have any more in-depth sense about how the money is going to be allocated and to what ends or to what purposes?
Sure. So, Steve, just very quickly, in terms of what the budget actually says, and again, I think the big piece is to come in the cybersecurity strategy. But what the budget says is that the main spending that's going to take place immediately is going to go to the communications security establishment. And what it's going to do is set up a cyber security coordination center that'll be the sort of focus for federal government protection of its own infrastructure, but the institution that will allow the federal government to reach out and connect with private sector partners and indeed the public at large to try and boost everybody's collective cybersecurity. And then money is also going to the RCMP for a cybercrime coordination unit, again, to put the RCMP at the center of this puzzle about how to deal with cybercrime. And there we're really talking about not state activity primarily, but individual activity or organized crime activity that can affect us all. If I could just add at the end, I mean, it's nice to have a pie chart with it all neatly broken down. One of the challenges, I think, is in the whole world of cyber aggression, the boundaries between state activity and non-state activity, between hacktivists and individuals and states and espionage and non-espionage activities, all of that is very, very blurred, and sometimes deliberately so.
Okay, fair point. And we thank you for sort of taking us very quickly through what cybersecurity factors were in the budget. And now let's bring it into the studio here. Eldon, I want to go to you first. Just give us your initial reaction to the big uptick in spending that the Government of Canada has planned for this file now. What's your take on it?
So I think it's a very good thing. You know, I've seen, especially in the last 3 years, the amount of crime, cybercrime increase easily 100% year over year. And, you know, I think that there's concerns about a lack of confidence. You know, if you feel that, you know, financial institutions are being hacked, you can't trust your information from getting out. There's a lot of, you know, different pieces that can lead to a crisis of confidence within, you know, financial institutions, the market, and this can have a spillover. And so it's great to see that they're taking this, they're taking interest in this and be able to put money towards that to strengthen, again, not only from a military perspective, but a spillover effect for, you know, other businesses and personally.
Melissa, as you look at what the Government of Canada has planned and what other countries have planned, how do we stack up?
I think that it's really it's a first step, and I was happy to see that it's actually part of a priority within the budget. But if we were to start to look at it, what percentage is it of the overall spend? I bet that it's probably not even 1%. It might be 0.01%. And when Canada is really kind of looking for the digital economy to project it forward and to be a digital power going forward, it must actually start to invest in the security and resilience of that overall economic strategy. This is the first of what I think is going to be a much larger wedge that will be required in order to ensure the security and resilience of Canada going forward.
You come to us today from Vienna, Austria. So let me ask you to compare what it looks like Canada's about to embark on compared to what other countries that you know of are doing.
I agree with Melissa. It's a good first step, but money is not everything. So at the end of the day, the dollar has to hit the road. And what you have to build is an ecosystem in the country, domestically. So if you look in some other geographies, small countries really very precisely invest into building capabilities and skills from high school over universities, building an ecosystem for startups like Israel, or really trying to engage the public-private sector collaboration much more intensively, like UK is doing that, I think, very nicely. So it's a very nice first step, but it's just part of the equation.
If it's just, Melissa, a first step, if you consider many steps down the road, how much money should we be spending in this country annually to keep ourselves as safe as is possible?
Well, I think that you actually have to look at what is the strategy of Canada. Does it want to become an exporter of cybersecurity solutions, which is what Israel has decided? Does it want to encourage foreign direct investment to stimulate the economy, which is what India has chosen to do? Does it want to become a world power in cyber, which other countries have decided? And when you start to look at that, then you start to see, well, it's part of my top 3-5 objectives for Canada going forward, and then you can start to prioritize. Currently, I believe that the critical infrastructures and services of Canada are vulnerable, and that a risk assessment needs to be done. And when you start to see what the state of insecurity of Canada is, I think it will be alarming, and then people will be motivated to do more for it and solving part of the problem for the digital economy.
Eldon, those are all good questions that have just been asked. Do you know whether we want to be significant players in all of those fields?
Well, you know, I think we should, personally. I know that from cybersecurity, you know, worldwide, I do a lot of traveling. Canada has a stellar reputation for tech, for education. I think we're among the top 5 countries for cybersecurity resources, and so on. There's no reason that we can't, you know, build it up like, you know, Israel is well known for.
Well, other than commitment, do you see a commitment to be a player in that way?
You know, I think this is a very good first step to send that message. You know, and there's additional interest in the government reaching into Canadian firms as well and saying, we would like to grow this locally.
Gotcha. Wesley Work, let me bring you back in. And again, if you were the Minister of Finance and you wanted to indicate to the world that we are serious players in this business, what should the numbers in next year's budget look like?
Maybe another $1 billion. It's hard to know about numbers, and you can only shove so much money out of the door and hope to use it effectively. You know, I think the missing piece so far is seeing what's going to be in the cybersecurity strategy. And, you know, we can all guess at what might be there and predict parts of it. There was a public consultation as the government was thinking about this cybersecurity strategy. But my guess is that it's going to have 2 additional pieces that don't particularly emerge in the budget statement itself. One is, I think Canada is going to take a lead, in fact, from the Australian cybersecurity strategy and try and position itself, as one of your other panelists suggests, as a kind of global exporter of cybersecurity expertise. I think Canada is also going to try and take a more powerful role on the global stage, in keeping with its other objectives about Canada being back and pursuing a Security Council seat. I think it's going to try and take a role in trying to find some global norms to control the use of cyber instruments and cyber power. I think there's a great interest in the Liberal government in trying to do that. Maybe we'll establish a cyber ambassador position or something like that, or at least take a stand. But I expect to see that. I also expect to see some significant initiatives being taken to ensure that we're creating a kind of new next generation talent pool of cybersecurity professionals. And I think the federal government wants to take a lead on that, and it fits with other aspects of the federal budget itself, the kind of innovation agenda, the learning agenda that is there. So I think those things will be in the cybersecurity strategy. The slightly odd thing is having the budget first and saying the budget is going to, you know, pay for a strategy, which we haven't yet seen. It might have been nice to see the strategy first, but maybe these things are difficult to coordinate in Ottawa. Well,
one of the reasons some experts think we need a strategy is that they keep expecting the big one to happen. And when we say the big one, we don't mean an earthquake like they talk about in California. We're talking about what if a large region in the country had its electricity grid, for example, attacked in a cyberspatial way, and what might happen. And a couple of years ago, we had the very well-known broadcaster Ted Koppel on this program, who wrote a book about that very scenario. Let's play a snippet of that interview, and then we'll come back and chat. Sheldon, if you would, roll the clip.
Once you're without electricity, you are without the capability of, I mean, particularly if you live in an urban center, you're without the capability of heating or cooling your home. The water supply is going to stop in the sense that it requires pumps which are powered by electricity to get that water into the various apartment buildings, into the flats throughout the city. The worst part about that is not merely the fact that there wouldn't be enough drinking water available, but also the fact that you don't have the capability of disposing of human waste. Within the matter of just a few days, that becomes a major crisis. What's really frightening about the possibility of a cyber attack on the power grid is that the experts believe that the power could remain out for months.
That is quite the nightmare scenario, Walter, and I wonder how likely you think that is sometime in the next few years.
Frankly, I believe it's not an if, it's really when it will happen. And the problem is unfortunately very asymmetric. As a defender, you have to defend your whole environment, so to speak, be it a utility or critical infrastructure. As an attacker, you have to just find the one vulnerability you can get in. So just from that perspective, you understand how much more difficult it is to really defend yourself. And further on, it is, you have a huge catch-up requirement, so to speak. Because over a couple, maybe 2 or 3 decades, cybersecurity was on an agenda. But somewhere down the road, somebody took care of it. But it has to be on the board agenda. It has to be in the government's agenda as well. So that is the problem. You are living in an environment where every day it's getting more complex, more digital, more vulnerabilities, and you have to do your homeworks, which you haven't done over the last 2 decades. And that's a little bit, smells like a perfect storm.
Smells like a perfect storm. Do you agree that it's more a case of when, not if?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already actually seen the grid go down multiple times in Ukraine as, I think, a test case. And there is malware, or I would say pre-positioned weapons throughout our infrastructures and our energy grids here in North America and actually through Europe that is the same type of code that's been embedded in Ukraine and used against Ukraine. So it's incumbent upon our governments and our industries to start to do a cleanup of the infrastructure and start to ensure that we can actually we can fail gracefully or restore rapidly.
Okay, but Eldon, I can hear people at home saying right now, that's Ukraine. They just lost 1/3 of their country. Governing that place right now is extremely difficult. It's a country that's in a lot of trouble. We're Canada. Surely that would never happen in Canada. Should we feel that smug?
So, the smugness, the Canadian smugness, I think that it's something that we all deal with on a regular basis, that we think that we're too small or we're too nice to be hit by this kind of thing. The good thing is that the utilities and other power providers and so on, they themselves recognize that this is a threat, and it's not hyperbole. We're not trying to inflate it out of proportion, and they are we have utilities, power companies that are coming to us to ask what can we do to move ahead. And there's in the U.S. there's these ISACs, so information sharing analysis centers, that are specific to the vertical. So there's financial, and then there's utilities, and they've been working together. It came by presidential directive from Clinton, so it's been quite a while. They have some good sort of frameworks as they can use, and I know that there are firms here that are using those as well to see what applies, and they are prepping for this.
Let's put on the record here. You did work in this area for President Obama,
and
President Bush, the son, Bush 43. Did it seem to you that they were seized of this issue in a way that met with the concerns that are out there?
Each of the presidents handled it very differently, and so has President Trump. And I think that the threat under President Bush was that we were very concerned about the intellectual property theft, the targeting of the secrets, the formulas, what makes our businesses unique. And we're still seeing that. And you saw that as a priority under President Obama, and you're seeing that also as a presidential priority under President Trump. But President Obama began to talk more about our critical infrastructures are at risk, and we need to have more restoration and protection initiatives underway. And President Trump has called out that there are 6 key infrastructures that are important, not the 16 that were called out for under President Clinton. And so that we need to narrow our focus. And I was happy to see in the budget here in Canada that there was 3 specifically called out. There are 3 that I argue are the most important. Energy, because without power, nothing works. Finance, because you got to have the global economy up and going. And actually, the global economy can't run without telecoms, because that's the free flow of goods, services, data, and more importantly, capital across borders. Mm-hmm. So those are the 3 priorities that were highlighted in the budget, which I imagine will be in the actual strategy as you start to see unfold here.
As we talk budgets, let's put a little more information on the table here. Cybercrime extracts 15 to 20% of the $3 trillion the global internet economy generates annually. Canada loses, according to the Chamber, more than $3 billion a year to cybercrime. Around 70% of Canadian businesses have been the victims of cyber attacks, 70%. And the average total cost of a data breach in Canada is almost $6 million. That's $225 per lost or stolen record. Okay, Walter, come on in here. 15 to 20% loss to cybercrime. Do we just have to say that's kind of the cost of doing business in this economy now?
Certainly not. Certainly not, because this is not the ceiling. If we want to be, put countermeasures and mitigations next to it, it will go up and up and up. Because you have to imagine that there is really a business model out there. So you find price lists of how much it costs to crack an email account, a Facebook account. There are people who are specializing in social engineering, so basically to know how I can threaten Walter best. There are people who are specializing on the weaponry, so basically developing the right malware for your situation. There are people who are specializing on how do I get the malware into a system, into a company, and so on. And even if you are maybe not so much let's say, experienced in how to deal with bitcoins, you find a hotline. So it tells you, if you want to threaten something and get a ransom, call it, and they tell you how you deal with bitcoins.
Come on, here's how you do it?
Indeed.
Yeah. Crime as a
Indeed.
service.
Crime as a service.
Crime as a service, and in fact, it only takes me $1 to get the malware to attack your computer, and only $200 to take down, a widespread amount of computers in the city.
And you can extract how much from me if you do that, which costs you a whopping $1.
I don't know. It all depends. Are you willing to pay?
Well, that's a good point. Eldon, which Canadian businesses, in your judgment, would be the most vulnerable to these kinds of attacks?
So, I think there's a sort of a nexus between opportunity and preparedness. So, if we look at the biggest firms here, so the big banks, they've been dealing with this kind of threat and these attackers for well over a decade, and they're fairly well advanced in this kind of thing. If you take the next tier down, so you're looking at things like smaller financial institutions, so registered investment accounts, they would have they're smaller companies but have big company problems, not necessarily the tech staff to help defend it. That second layer also would be things like legal. So there's a lot of legal firms in Canada. They've generally not necessarily put as much rigor behind the defense of data itself, but we've seen again in the last 2 years that it has become more of a priority, and that they're building up these pieces. The hit of ransomware that started 3 or 4 years ago really put that in the spotlight. So that something that changed from where attackers were doing long-term, slow, getting into organizations, mining that data very slowly. The ransomware wave that started a few years ago did a twist and said, let's get Bitcoin very quickly. So sort of a smash and grab attack methodology. And that opened it up to broadly all businesses as well. So if you think of who has the most valuable data and who could afford to pay, that's who were the biggest targets.
Let's go back to Ottawa on the next question. How, Wesley, in your judgment, how far down the road is the federal government invested in ensuring that the businesses in this country are relatively well protected from all of this?
Well, that's a fascinating question, Steve, and it may well be at the heart of the cybersecurity strategy and a lot of policy making and thinking to come. The challenge is that the federal government embraces that intent because they recognize that the digital domain, the digital economy, is one that's primarily in the hands of the private sector. The federal government has its own information infrastructure it has to protect, and I suspect is through the capabilities of the communication security establishment pretty good at that and probably getting better. The challenge is to decide how best to reach out to the private sector, share expertise, share best practices, and the biggest question of all is around regulation. Are there going to be standards that the federal government wants to insist that it will impose on the private sector, standards around security preparedness, cybersecurity preparedness, standards around reporting of breaches, and so on? And I think this is the new domain for the federal government that it's thinking hard about. But the first step, I think, is just going to be the kind of outreach to the private sector that the budget suggests they're building the capability to do, or at least changing the capability to do. That's shifting it all into the hands of the communication security establishment. And the interesting thing there is that the CSE, as it's called, is of course a very secretive organization. It's getting better at being transparent. The next thing it's going to have to learn is getting better at working with the private sector in as open a way as possible about sharing of some very sensitive information and knowledge about what goes on in the darker corners of the cyber universe.
I want to follow up with Melissa on something you just said. We hear from businesses all the time that they already feel overregulated. Do you think that a federal government of the future ought to impose a kind of a standard on private businesses in the country that you have to have in place this kind of security against cyber warfare, or else you can't do business in Canada?
Well, I mean, cyber warfare and taking proactive measures to manage your risk, I think, are different topics. Right now, I don't believe that many companies have realized that they are a digital business and that they have digital risks that have to be managed just like currency risk or political risk or other things, and it needs to move up on their risk register. Really good example of this would be the most recent malware that was released called NotPetya at the end of June. It was a destructive malware. It went from Ukraine to Memphis, Tennessee in less than 5 minutes and destroyed everything on its path and every connected company to that. So for example, Maersk Shipping was one of the victims of it. Maersk is the largest container shipping company around the world. In less than 5 minutes, it lost 4,000 servers, 45,000 computers, 2,500 applications, and it shut down operations in 76 ports. It cost them $400 million, and they're still restoring their services.
I was going to say, how do they get it back? They haven't got it back yet.
They have not fully up yet. And could you imagine if they shut down the port of Vancouver? What would be the economic impact here in Canada? Another example would be that, and that same virus hit Federal Express. And Federal Express has now shut down all operations in Eastern Europe. And so it lost market share to DHL and others. Can you imagine if you're a parcel company, but you're really a digital company that can't operate with moving parcels without its digital backbone?
It's a whole new way of looking at this.
Yeah, and then if you think, there's two other examples, just because I think it's important. Merck Pharmaceuticals here in the down in the United States, it had its manufacturing operations shut down, so life-saving drugs were delayed going to market, so people's health was affected. And then if you want to go to just the emotional appeal, Mondello, the Oreo cookie company, had to stop actually producing some of cookies in Australia
now we're
and in
serious.
Ireland. So, you can't have your chocolate cookies and dip it in the milk because I'm a digital business that I didn't realize I was going to manage my risks.
Okay, when they're coming after the Oreos, then it's serious. Now we've got to get serious about this. But, Walter, tell me, do you think governments around the world need to impose standards, as Wesley described them, standards or regulations on businesses that require them, that obligate them to have a certain amount of defense against this new kind of warfare?
I do believe so, and it's a very delicate question, obviously, because what we sometimes see is, that the pendulum goes into over-regulation, or obviously cybercrime doesn't stop at borders. So a lot of jurisdictions are involved, and the downside risk I see is that you have a patchwork of regulation across the topic, across geography, industries, and so on. And that will only lead to one thing. It will be ignored to some extent, as long as possible, and then people just have to react because somebody told them they have to react. So what it really needs is a cooperation very early on between the public and the private sector. Think the cyber security, cyber resilience in a more holistic way, and understanding the interlinks between the topics. Sometimes you find very straightforward, simplified messages like privacy can never go with security and vice versa. It's just not true.
Not true, yeah.
So you need this kind of engagement, and otherwise you will face some serious challenges in the near future.
Please.
I think it is important, as our governments are actually thinking about regulation, our corporations are global. And we're now having to be, as you said, Walter, we're having to actually, as a global corporation, am I going to apply with Europe's general data protection regulation, or am I going to apply with China's cybersecurity law, or am I going to comply with the New York finance law? Because I can't comply with all three. because Europe has chosen one direction, China has chosen a different direction, and America has chosen a third direction, and we're not actually harmonized globally. So if I'm a global corporation, I have to choose which law I'm going to follow and which one I'm going to break.
Or why don't you just lobby these governments to get on the same page?
Why can't we just all get along?
There we go. Going back to Ottawa, you are coming to us, Wesley, from a post-secondary institution in this country, and I presume the future talent to take on these challenges is going to be developed at the post-secondary institutions of this country. So the question becomes, are they ready for this? Are they doing this?
Look, as much as I would love to defend my own sector, I think the answer has to be no. In part because universities have, I think, a great difficulty in deciding how best to channel the student population that comes to them. May come to them at an early age with unformed ideas about what they want to do, but universities are not very good at trying to kind of encourage certain streams of learning. We've abandoned that sort of idea a long time ago for what's often described as a cafeteria menu. I think the universities are going to have to invest more in general in the whole field of cyber, understanding cybersecurity, creating cybersecurity specialists. I think most universities are a long way from doing that at the moment. But I would also say, in response to your question, I don't think this will just happen in the university world. It'll obviously happen in the world of colleges. It should happen earlier on in terms of high school education, and it's going to have to happen in terms of ongoing training and learning within private sector entities. So it's going to have to be a sort of broad spread, if you like, educational and training push. But I wouldn't look just to the universities to try and solve this talent creation, talent pool problem.
Are there enough skilled people out there, Eldon, to work for you at your business?
So, we've got about 300 people in our office in Cambridge, and there's some incredible talent that's coming out of schools, colleges, and universities. I think one thing that I'd like to see in this budget, part of this, is to see this ongoing commitment to, with education, get people enthused about starting cybersecurity firms and strategies and grow companies, not out of startup and into sort of scale up perspective, the kind of ecosystem that Israel is so well known for. And this has that, that add-on effect of being able to, increase the tax base. There is a significant brain drain of students leaving. We're close to University of Waterloo. There's a significant percentage that leave and go down to the south, and we lose that knowledge, we lose that entrepreneurial spirit, and it's something I'd like to see, and it's something I've tried to foster as well within East Entire.
Most of the best, well, listen, I think there are independent surveys that show that most of the best universities in this world are in the United States, many of them anyway. Do you think they are adequately seized of this issue and creating the next generation of talent to deal with these issues?
Adequately, probably not, no, but we have hundreds of universities that are offering cybersecurity programs. It's initiated through our government, through the Department of Homeland Security and National Security Agency. There's an accreditation. And a number of our universities see this as a way to actually enhance their brand by actually offering these types of courses and certificates and then degrees. But I think that we shouldn't just be talking about this at the university level. Our kids and or grandkids all know how to use an iPad at probably the age of 2 because they're watching Disney films. And I think cybersecurity needs to be brought in from kindergarten through elementary and secondary school. And it needs to be as we're issuing tablets and computers to them, or we're asking them to do online homework through Blackboard or whatever is the cloud-based program, that they need to understand security and privacy. As we're asking them to bring their homework in on a thumb drive, we should think twice about that because it's usually infected and we're just now passing a virus, like not washing our hands after we've coughed or in a public place. So we need to actually normalize this like we have for other things in society and bring it to the children, because the children will actually adopt it further and faster and then bring the rest of us along.
And there's one other piece I'd like to add to that, and that has to do with social media. There's a whole generation or two that have no problem putting out very personal information and not necessarily thinking of the ramifications of that 5, 10, 15 years down the road, right? It's on the internet, it could be there forever. And so there's that piece of education I think needs to go along with it as well. So you can be very tech savvy with these apps, but there are, if you give away your personal information, something that I would be aghast at giving, but you might just, of a certain generation, a certain age, just maybe, I have no problem giving this information out without the long-term effects.
Right. Walter, just a couple of minutes to go here. Let's try one more question. How are we managing the transition from a history where threats to our well-being were all very tangible to a future where the threats to our well-being may be invisible, intangible, and maybe even more menacing than in the past?
Fantastic question. I think it's a perfect link to the previous discussion, because I always say cybersecurity is a human problem masquerading as a technical one. So at the end of the day, we have to be aware what we're doing with our personal data, how we engage with the community and with the social network. And it is indeed much more a question of education and awareness training than of the latest apps for protecting something and firewalls and data loss protection and what you haven't seen. And that takes time. And that's also a problem for our government and also for our corporation, because there's no silver bullet, there's no quick fix. So even if you put money into this problem, resilient cybersecurity, it will take time. And many companies, I'm afraid to say so, won't have this time. And it's then just a matter of time and question, who will be the next one?
Who will be the next? Well, the next one getting the next question is Wesley Wark. Why don't you finish it up for us, Wesley, and tell us about how well we're managing this transition I just described from tangible, real threats to who knows what, and maybe even worse than what we've been dealing with in the past.
Look, Steve, I've been searching for a slightly more optimistic perspective on this. I mean, we're not yet at the age in which cyber weapons are the new nuclear weapons. We may head in that direction. It is clear at the moment that offense has an advantage over the defense. It may not always be that way. I think the solution is partly going to be around, if you like, human engineering, getting people to better understand the digital world and its risks that they live in. And that's a challenge for society at large and for individuals. But I also think there's going to be technological fixes which will boost the defensive capabilities and probably do so in kind of automatic inbuilt ways so that technologically challenged people like myself don't have to figure out cyber solutions on my own. And I think that's one of the missing pieces. We have to have a better kind of inbuilt system for kind of automatic security applied to our digital activities than we do at the moment.
Terrific. That's Wesley Wark, Professor of Public and International Affairs. And back here in our studio, Melissa Hathaway to my left, the President of the Hathaway Global Strategies. Eldon Sprickeroff, the Founder and Chief Security Strategist of eCentire. And over here, our friend, mein Freund, from Vienna, Austria. There's Walter Bohmeyer, Senior Partner, Global Leader in Cybersecurity at the Boston Consulting Group. And we do want to thank again Cyber Canada Senior Leadership Summit for bringing the three of you here in our Toronto studio to our Toronto studio today. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.